Hi, this is Andrea Kane, and I'm here with you with HIT 445. We are finishing up week one finally. This is chapter 4, using teamwork and performance improvement. So this is video number 4 of the 4 series for week one. Let's go ahead and get started. If you look in your textbook at page 51, you will see what the learning objectives are and the fact that they are identical to what you're seeing on the screen. We're going to talk about effective uses of teams. Look at differences between the roles of leader and members, and talk about team charters, team roles, ground rules listing, questioning, all those types of things. So we talked about some performance improvement steps in chapter 3. Now we're moving on to the team itself. There are different kinds of teams. There's something called a rapid improvement team. There's an educational training team that can be involved, and then there's also functional, cross-functional PI teams. And this is all on page 52 in your book. A rapid improvement team, that's a small group of people that usually go in, they construct very simple fixes that can improve work processes without going through the whole PI process, and without involving other needs. I've seen these done in hospitals. For instance, they'll take a small group in the ED, in the emergency department, and they'll go in and they'll identify a couple of within the ED department processes. The rapid improvement team will run through, they'll go ahead and construct who are the customers, what are the customers' needs, is the current process working or not? It's usually not. Then they go ahead and say, okay, what could we do? What should we do? They often will gather quick data on it. They'll go ahead and start brainstorming and putting together ideas of what they're going to do. They'll do some test runs, and then they'll implement what their proposed solution is. They'll gather some more data. And a rapid improvement team usually works in like a 3-day span. 3 to 4 day span. They're very quick. They're right in there. They're working on it. They're piloting. They're refining and honing whatever it is that they're doing, so that when they walk away after 3 days, it's all set. It's all done. The education materials are ready to be run, and the process is ready to move into place. I've seen this done with the ICU. I've seen it done in surgery. Usually it's in those kinds of areas that it happens. I've seen it been done in pharmacy, lab. So it's those types of areas. It doesn't get into cross-functional activity. When you're talking about functional or cross-functional, functional means it's staff from a single department or service area. Cross-functional means it's multiple departments or service areas. So an example, a functional team might be formed in HIM to deal with something that's going on in HIM. But that's not necessarily a rapid improvement team, because it's not a tight time frame. It's not a 3-day, we're in, we're out. We're using people who are experts at doing rapid improvement events. Functional and cross-functional are following the more lengthy process to do what they're doing. But functional means it's within a particular area like HIM, and they're just dealing with what's going on in HIM and fixing it. Cross-functional would be, okay, there's something wrong with the revenue cycle, so we're going to have registration there, or patient access. We're going to have HIM. We're going to have patient financial services or billing. And we're going to have those areas all working together on the process, because it's crossing functional areas. So that's where you get your cross-functional definition. Okay, well, how do you pull together your team? How do you decide which departments are involved? How do you decide which people of which departments are involved? Because it's not enough to just say, oh, we want departments. You need people from those departments. And then again, do you need to include the customer, not include the customer? Do you need to include whoever is upstream in the process before the process, who's going to be supplying it, materials or services, that sort of thing, as well as who's downstream in the process that's going to receive whatever it is that happens after the process or is the outcome of the process. So let's start first with composition. You take a look at the process that you're going to be improving, theoretically. Hopefully, everyone hopes you're going to improve it. And you decide who's in this, who's a stakeholder, who's directly involved. If you're talking, let's say you're talking about medication administration. That could involve everyone from pharmacy to nursing to physicians to the people who maintain the pharmacy distribution stations where the nurses get the drugs. It can include the pharmacy techs who are doing the medication reconciliation process. It can include it's a wide variety. It can include IT, if you're talking about programs or systems or interfaces or things like that. There's a wide variety of people who can be involved. Customers, sometimes it makes, let me go back to departments really quick. Okay, so you figured out we need somebody from this department, somebody from that department, somebody from some other department. Okay, great, you have identified the departments. Now identify the individuals. And I will tell you that most effective PI teams have frontline staff on them. Do they need leaders? Absolutely. But they need the frontline people who are currently doing that process. They need somebody to represent. If you're going to have a leader represent a frontline person, that leader had better have performed that flawed process multiple times before they sit in on a PI team and represent that frontline person. That frontline person who's performing that flawed process every day is the best person to be able to tell you, here are where the pinch points are. Here's where customers get frustrated. Here's where I get frustrated. Here's where I don't have what I need. Here's where waste occurs. All of those types of things. So you need to free up frontline staff for these PI teams. Now, not all your frontline staff, but you need to select the person that's most applicable, that knows the most about it, to be involved. So one of the biggest mistakes that many PI teams make is they think, oh, we need a manager from this department, we need a manager from that department, and you've got managers who are trying to solve problems about which processes they've never performed, or they performed once 3 years ago. And they really, truly don't understand what's going on and can't speak to the details. So that's one of the things I would add to this in the real world. It's not enough to say which departments. You need to know which people, which individual positions, roles, functions. If your process problem is occurring on third shift, you don't need a first shifter there. You need that third shifter, because the problems, anyone who's worked different shifts in a healthcare organization, or weekends versus holidays versus Monday through Friday, they can tell you with 1,000% confidence what happens on third is different than first. And what happens on a weekend is different than Monday through Friday. And what happens on a holiday is very different than what happens on a Monday through Friday. And if your process flaws are coming up during those off times, weekends, holidays, third shift, those are the individuals you need to have involved, because they are the ones who are experiencing it, who can talk about it, who are knowledgeable. That's really important. So I'll get off my soapbox. But just so you know, don't just think departments, think individuals, and think about the specific, not only role, but the time, the area, the location. If there's an issue that's happening primarily with off-site clinics, don't involve hospital staff. You might need them for different parts that you pull in, but to be on the PI team, you need somebody that's representing the area that has the flawed process. So who's the customers? Okay, well, if it's a customer that is outside of the hospital, like a patient or a patient family member, make sure you get leadership involved, because they'll have to determine whether or not they can bring in someone like that. or whether they need to do an interview process outside of that, or whether they're going to use survey information. Sometimes they'll survey customers or use patient satisfaction results to be able to gain customer feedback. If it's a physician, if it's a process that involves physicians, you better be seeking out those physicians and you better include them. You may not be able to get them to sit on your PI team, but you need to have a physician that can represent all of the others, that can be pulled in at different times to answer questions and to give insight. That is absolutely critical. Who supplies the process? You need to know who is providing stuff for you that is involved. Is it a delivery issue? Is it an ordering issue? Is it a stocking issue? Is it where the materials are located? Who's handling it? A good example of one organization that I worked at was they were trying to hold surgery accountable for tissue products that were being delivered and weren't being refrigerated. Well, that's all well and good, but if they're delivered to materials management and materials management is off-site and doesn't have access to a refrigerator to refrigerate these, and materials management is not in a position where they can hop in a van every single time one of these deliveries occurs and take it immediately to surgery to check it in, it isn't going to matter. You've got to include both. So you've got to make sure that you're thinking about not just who should be responsible or who you think is responsible or who has a hand in it. You've got to talk all the way through the process from start to finish, who's involved. So specific roles, and again, this starts on page 53 in your book, and you can read through all of this. You have to have a leader. A facilitator, in my opinion, this is my professional opinion with experience, is a facilitator is optional. You absolutely have to have a leader, and I would argue that sometimes it's effective in a big group to have co-leaders, to have two leaders that work together. I worked on a very large and very important PI process for a healthcare organization where the results were taken to the board. And there were two of us who were co-leaders. And I would strongly advocate that when you're dealing with something that's that complex, that sophisticated, that you have two co-leaders that can work together and accomplish what needs to be accomplished. A facilitator, they're nice to have. And if you have people involved, let's say you're an organization that's just started really dipping your toes into PI, not a whole lot of people are trained in PI. Yeah, you need a facilitator. You need somebody who's been through these rapid improvement team events, who's been through PI, who's done PI, who's been trained in all of that as a facilitator to get everybody on board. But once you have enough people trained in your organization or enough who have gone through that process, you really probably don't need a facilitator. And it just really depends on what kind of process improvement you're doing. Members, yes, why have a leader without a member? You need multiple members, and they need to be well representative of everyone that's involved. Recorder. A recorder is helpful because having been a PI team leader multiple times, a recorder is great because they're taking notes, and you as the leader, you're leading, you're listening, you're facilitating, you're doing all these things, and sometimes it's hard to go back and be a recorder. The times that I didn't have a recorder, I could, as a leader, I could ask someone, will you be a recorder for this meeting? Or as a leader, I had to remember to stop and take notes as I was going through and be the recorder myself. So I guess for me, having led PI teams and been a member of PI teams, I think it's valuable to have a recorder. I would recommend that because you have one person who's focusing on gathering that information, because everybody walks out of that meeting and not everybody remembers. And to have the details of what happened, what decisions were made, what research is going to be done further, who's responsible, when it's going to come back to the team, all of that makes it so much easier. So I'm an advocate of recorders. Facilitators, and meh. If you need them, use them. If you don't, you can get by if you have a good experienced leader, because the leader can facilitate as well. Timekeeper. This to me, again, like the facilitator, is optional. If you want to give somebody that role, that's great. But, it's not necessary. The leader should be responsible for keeping time anyway. Facilitator also should be responsible for keeping time if you have one of those. And trust me, your members will keep you on time because they don't want to stay any longer than is necessary. They have many other things to do, things that are important. And oftentimes members will be your timekeepers unofficially because they want to keep things moving. And if you have a good leader, they will keep things moving and you won't need a timekeeper. Part of being a good leader is managing the meetings, managing the time, managing the activities, making sure everything's moving forward on the right timeline. All right, so that I'm lecturing now from the perspective of having lived it. My apologies. When you have your quiz, just make sure you read through the book because your quiz will be on the book, not on my experience. But I want you to have both because when you walk out the door and you graduate and you get that really cool HIT job and PI comes up as a topic, you're like, yeah, I remember that. We definitely need a leader. We've got to have members and they've got to be representative of all these areas. We could have a timekeeper, yeah. Different people can volunteer. We could have one person every time, but we definitely need a recorder. And if our leader is not a really good, experienced PI leader that can facilitate as well, then we need an experienced facilitator. All right, PI team leader activities. What does leader do? Well, it depends on what's happening and how this all lays out. But the leader really should be the one preparing for and scheduling the meetings. They need to get those out, make sure that they're on people's calendars, make sure that there's agendas, that the agendas are concise and that they're laid out clearly. And if there's any packets of material that need to be read or reviewed or activities that need to be performed, like an audit, you need audit results coming in before the meeting, that they're responsible for making sure that that happens. So let's pretend we're having our very first PI meeting, and you're a member and I'm the leader. Let's just pretend that for the point of this lecture here, so to speak. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to send you an email, and I'm going to invite you to be a member of the team. And I'm going to explain what the team's about, what we're going to do, why do we have this team. I'm going to use SBAR, Situation, Background, Assessment, Recommendation. I'm going to say, here's what our situation is, and here's why we need a team. Background, what is the context? How did this happen? What's going on around us that made this so necessary? Not just the background, but where are we at and what do we need? Who has sponsored us as a senior leader or an executive to tell us that this is necessary or approved or that type of thing. Assessment. Okay, so we've decided we need this PI team. We've identified what the process is that we're going to tackle. We've identified what the customer, who's the customer, what their needs are, what regulatory things are going on around that make this necessary. We started to gather data, and then I'm going to explain why we chose you to be on the team, why you are so important that we need to take you away from other activities to be a part of this PI group, the perspective that only you can bring to the table. So I'm going to send that information to you and invite you to the team, and I'm going to then follow it up with a calendar invite, and that calendar invite will go out to every member of the team and it will set the meetings. The next thing that'll happen is I will send out an agenda, and hopefully with that agenda will come some documents for people to read, to start to understand, to research the context, to look at the data, to look at benchmarking, to look at all of this stuff so that by the time you get to that first meeting, you have been educated. You're not going in blind. Then when you get to the meeting, the agenda is there, and we're going to go through the agenda, and we're going to stay on task. We're not going to go off and rabbit trail. We're going to say, okay, here are the things we need to discuss today. Here's what we need to come away with. We're going to identify action steps. We're going to identify who is responsible, and we're going to make sure that we set dates. Okay, so we need to ask Susie. Susie, we need some data from this area about this process. Can you bring it to us when we meet again in 2 weeks? Can you email it out at least 2 days in advance of our meeting so that we can look at that? We need it for this. And so the leader is responsible not only for making sure that meeting happens, but it happens effectively, it happens efficiently. It's a good use of people's time. People don't feel like, oh, I've just come here and I'm sitting here like a lump. Nobody's talking to me. Nobody's asking me anything. I'm not contributing. I'm bored out of my mind. Nothing's going to change, and I'm just going to head back to work. You got to keep everybody's attention on task at hand and really make sure that you're facilitating getting that feedback. You're getting people to open up, to talk, to share ideas, to bring up data, to ask questions, to argue specific points of view, or talk about historically. Maybe this was brought up 5 years ago and it was shot down then. Why was it shot down then? Does anybody remember? Do we still have that data? Can we compare it to now? Does anybody know if this is a regulatory agency issue? How is it affecting our patients? How is it affecting our providers? All these types of things. You want to get everybody that's at the table to be sharing and to participate. And then, of course, after the meeting, you have got to follow up. You've got to make sure that everything that was supposed to be done is done, being done, that you're preparing for the next meeting, that you're making sure everybody's got the tools. So again, this is performance improvement. Does everybody understand what PI methodology is? If not, you pull those people offline outside of the meeting and you go through and you say, hey, I'm going to give you some PI information. Do you have a few minutes? Let's walk through it. Take 10 minutes, keep it nice and short and sweet. Go through it. Show them what the methodology is, the tools, techniques, so that when you come back again for that next meeting, you've got that data. You've got people who are now educated. You've got more information. You can make sure your action plans have begun. All of these types of things. Maybe you've got enough that you can start building the new process so that eventually you can pilot it. Maybe you're trying to figure out where you can pilot it, when you can pilot it. Does it need to be on a specific unit? Does it need to start on a specific shift? Maybe third shift is a better shift to pilot it on. Maybe there's a med surg unit that's the best place to pilot it. Maybe it's a physician's office. Maybe you're doing something physician office related and you want to pick one particular practice or one particular provider to start piloting it with. You're wanting to talk to IT. How are we gathering data? How are we going to capture this? Is there some kind of programming or interfacing or upgrade from the IT system that's going to be involved with all of this? And what's the time frame for that? You want to critique the meetings. What went well? What didn't go well? And you want to ask those questions at the end of every meeting. Okay, guys, we're here. We're finishing up. We're going over. We've reviewed what the next action steps are. When we meet the next time, let's critique our meeting real quick. What went well? What didn't go so well? What do we need to change up next time? The PI leader is the primary spokesperson and presenter for the team, but they are not the only one. And I would say primary does not mean only. Make sure you include the others, because a lot of times you may find as leader that there is someone who is more knowledgeable or more passionate or knows more people in the organization that can be influenced by this, that would make a better presenter for the team when you finally move forward. Maybe someone is an unspoken leader in their area, so you want to have them involved. So just because you're a leader, you shouldn't be all stuck on yourself and say, well, I'm the primary, so I'm always going to be the one. Well, sometimes that's true, and it'll come to you and you'll have those responsibilities. But a lot of times good leaders look for others and involve others and see the benefit in having people with those strengths take on those roles. In fact, we will be talking in week 8 about strengths. And anyone who has the strength of woo, W-O-O, woo, which you will find out about in week 8, they are a fabulous spokesperson and presenter. In fact, when I have led teams, specifically functional teams within HIM, and I knew who my people were who had that skill, a lot of times I deferred to them to be a spokesperson or presenter because, oh my, with that gift of the strength of woo, they were phenomenal. way better than I could have been. So keep attendance records. It's important to do that. You got to keep not only attendance records, but meeting minutes and agendas and data and all those types of things. And then if you have absent members, you want to make sure that you contact them and make sure that they've got what they need from the meeting that they missed, as well as that they're up to speed and know what they need to do to be ready for the next meeting. So you want to do a lot of this electronically. The facilitator can serve as an advisor and consultant to the team. They're supposed to be a neutral, non-voting member. Supposed to be. Reality can be a little bit different depending on what organization you're in or what activity is occurring or which facilitator you ended up being assigned. But they're supposed to be neutral, non-voting, objective, that sort of thing. They are, again, supposed to be there to suggest when alternative PI methods or procedures might work better and to keep the team on target. They can help with managing group dynamics and resolving conflicts and modeling compromise. Although I would argue that your team leader really should be doing that as well, or before the facilitator. But a lot of facilitators, if they're there to facilitate and they are trained as a facilitator, that is something that they will insist on doing over the leader. They want to act as a coach and motivator for the team. Yay, yay, rah, rah. You can do it. Don't give up. Everything's going to be great. And so on. Assisting consensus building. Sometimes when there's conflict, people see things so differently. And how do you get everyone together so that they're willing to cooperate and come up with a consensus decision? And then recognizing team and individual achievements. Again, I would argue that a leader needs to be doing that, but a very experienced facilitator will insist that it's theirs to bring that forward. What do you do if you're a member? Well, you definitely need to participate in decision making and plan development, identify opportunities for improvement, gather, prioritize, and analyze data, share your knowledge, information, and data that pertain to the process being investigated. And I would say as a member, you need to be there. You need to be present and attentive and alert, and you need to be open, and you need to be fair. You need to listen to others. And what are they saying? What are they not saying? How does your knowledge, what can you bring to the table to help others or help with this decision? All those types of things. Are there others that you can sway or involve or encourage or enlighten to do all this? So as a member, you're very important. Then recorder, it's basically recording the information from the group, creating appropriate charts and diagrams, assisting with notices and supplies for meetings. Again, most PI teams, they don't have the resources to have a recorder. Somebody in the group just has to do it, or somebody takes turns. Distributing notices, other documentation to team members, developing meeting minutes, producing an agenda for new meetings. Again, I'd say all this stuff usually falls to the leader, as it should. The timekeeper basically helps the team manage its time, notifies them during meetings of time remaining on each agenda item. Again, if you have a good leader, they take care of this all by themselves, and they don't need a facilitator, and they don't need a timekeeper. And trust me, if you've ever been a member of a PI team that does not manage its time well, whether you have a facilitator or not, whether you have a good leader or not, you will speak up to try and encourage things along just because it's driving you crazy. Team charters. All right, why do you need a team charter? Well, you need to understand why your team was implemented. What's the issue? What are you trying to accomplish? What's the process you're focusing on? What is your goal or vision? And then it lists the individual members of the team or their initial members and their respective departments. And it is helpful to keep the team's objective in focus, because there are times where you start out and you have a very narrow focus and you start to think, well, maybe it should be bigger than our narrow focus, but sometimes it can be too big. So coming back and saying, no, we can't fix the world. We can't save the world. We can't fix the world. At this point, we need to focus in on this one aspect. And that's not to say, especially like with rapid improvement teams, you have a specific focus. That's what you go in for. What you do may then be adopted by a PI team and expanded. And the same thing with the PI team. Maybe you're starting with something that's implemented with nursing in the hospital setting, but the PI team is going to take that and move beyond. And maybe it's either another PI team or it's going to be another group within the healthcare organization that takes it beyond hospital nursing into clinic nursing, into home health nursing, into other types of nursing. Mission statements. This is all on, where? Here we are. Okay. It is bottom of page 57, top of page 58. It talks about what a mission statement is versus a value statement. Mission statement needs to answer some questions, and those are listed for you. This is a sample mission statement. And then vision statements, how are they different than mission statements? And the vision is where you want to end up. What is your ideal end state? What do you want it to look like? So if you think about a home renovation, your mission statement might be that you want to do this renovation, you want to stay within budget, and you want to complete it within a specific deadline. Your vision statement is, what does that room look like? What colors did you use? What furnishings did you do? Did you redo the floors? Did you redo the walls? Did you redo the ceiling? Did you replace the lighting? You know, and granted, that's a very detailed vision, but what you can say is, okay, I want to renovate the living room. In my end ideal state, I want it to be more of a modern look, or more of a comfy, cozy cottage look, or I want to bring in something that's more arts and crafts era, or so it's what is that ideal end state? What does that look like? And then of course this is your vision statement sample. And there's more things, or more information back in your book. That's what I was trying to say, sort of. Make sure you check your understanding questions. All right, ground rules for meetings. These are the basic expectations. If you have really good people on your team, you don't ever have to go over these. People who are experienced PI team members, they know this. That's just part of being a team. They just know this. They don't have to be told, we expect you to attend. We expect you to manage your time well. We expect you to participate, communicate, be a part of the decision, keep documentation, and help us clean up the room afterwards, or rearrange the room before we get there. You don't ever have to say that. But if you have people who have never been part of a PI team before, it might be a good idea to say, hey, for those of you who have not been part of a PI team, these are the general expectations that we have of all team members, including the team leader, and this is what we do. It just helps keep everybody on board. Problem solving techniques. This is on page 60. They can be inclusive or exclusive. Inclusive means it takes a while because you have to gather all viewpoints and consider every single one. So if you've got the time for that, great. Exclusive means, you know what? We're going to have to just get some results. We're going to get some data and we're going to get some results. And that means that you may not consider everything and your process may end up very flawed in the end. So I would strongly suggest that you don't only be exclusive when you do problem solving. Just saying. Effective team objectives. Make sure you establish goals with everybody together, because everybody has to agree. This is where we're going. And communication can't just be telling, it also has to be listening and understanding. You need to make sure that it is a comfortable and safe environment, that what's said in the meeting doesn't leave the meeting, and that people are respectful to one another during the meeting. They can vehemently disagree, but as long as they do it in a respectful manner and they focus on the issue at hand, not the person or the personality. And you do need to consider feelings. There are times when decisions will significantly impact feelings. And part of the process of getting to making a consensus decision is for people to move through, I would say, almost the stages of grief, where they understand that they're finally going to have to let go. And that hurts. And that is sad. Sometimes some things change. I was part of a PI team. In fact, I was a co-leader of a PI team where we determined that we were going to end inpatient services at one hospital. And that hospital had had inpatient services for what? 50 years? More than 50 years, 60 years probably. And we had a nurse on our team who had worked at that hospital for 20 years. She had feelings, and they had to be addressed. We couldn't just steamroll over that. We needed her to be part of the decision, and we also all needed to respect her feelings. That had been her home for 20 years as a nurse, as a caregiver, as a person of the community. And we were asking her to step aside from all of that and consider what would life be like if we closed inpatient services at that hospital and she had to transfer to another one that was several miles away, and leave that behind. Leave her team behind, leave her unit behind, leave her facility behind. When you're talking decisions like that, there's feelings. There's strong feelings, and they need to be acknowledged. They need to be spoken. We wanted to encourage her to know she was in a safe place, and we knew there were going to be moments when there were tears. We knew there were going to be moments when there was anger. We knew there would be moments of desperation. Is there any other way around this? And we as a team had to all work through not only her feelings, but our feelings, and get to the point where we could make the decision of what was best for the community, for the organization, for our patients, not necessarily for individual people. You need to make sure that you distribute leadership and responsibility among all team members, that you let them shine, that there are times when the person from finance who has the numbers, it steps up to the plate and they're the ones leading when it's coming to financial data and financial decision making. You need to have people who are involved in the frontline hands-on caregiving, that they're there and they're leading when they're talking about, okay, here's exactly how we perform this, and here's what's best practice or standard of care, all of that. There are different times where those types of leadership or responsibility need to happen. And again, that has to do with distributing power among all team members, empowering them that their perspective is just as important as the leaders and needs to be heard and needs to be shared, needs to be respected. Can't tell you how important that is. And to let other people roll. There are times when they can get data or information that you can't as a leader get. You want them to feel empowered to go get it and go bring it back and be the one that presents it. You want to match the decision-making techniques to the type of decision-making situations. If you've got, I would say a healthy team has to have controversy and conflict. You have to. That's part of healthy team growth. If no one ever argues, no one ever has any conflict or controversy or doesn't speak up, that is not healthy. That is, and you will find that. I think as you look at the 5 dysfunctions of a team, that information, you will see that. It is true. Some of the scrappiest teams I have been on have been the ones that have come out with some of the most amazing things, because they put it all out there on the table and they argued and they brought it all out there, and what we finally hammered out, everyone was committed to, and everyone could see all sides of what we were doing. And so it was transparent, it was honest, and it bonded people. So I would definitely say that controversy and conflict are good things, as long as it is properly controlled, as long as it stays on the issues at hand and doesn't become personal or personality based or ugly. It has to remain professional. It has to remain respectful. And that's the challenge of being a leader when you're doing PI teams. You want to make sure that you stay focused on the issues that the team's been organized to address. You can't save the world. You can't solve all the world's problems. You've got to focus on what your team has been brought together to do, and that's what you're doing. Even when you find other things, don't let go of the other things. Put them on a parking lot list. That's what we used to do. We had a list called the parking lot. And these were issues that came up as we were working on our main issue, and we were like, oh, that needs to be solved, or oh, this would solve that other problem. We put them on the parking lot. They weren't part of what we were trying to solve at that time with that team, but we could then send those back to other people who could resolve them, or to other teams that were already meeting, or we could ask that a future team be assigned to that issue. Put them on the parking lot, but solve the issues you've been organized to solve. And then we need to be cost conscious in PI efforts. You can't always throw money at it. And in the world we live in, there's less and less money to throw at it. So if something costs $1,000 and it'll fix the problem, yeah, that's great. But you have to look around and see, is there anything less expensive that will do the same, that will have the same outcome? But having said that, I will also tell you, I've been in an organization that was absolutely foolish. They had an opportunity to solve their problem in a way that was not terribly expensive, but they didn't want to spend any money at all, so they absolutely refused, and they continue to have their problems. It's people can be penny wise and pound foolish, and it just depends on the organization where you're at and what in the world they're thinking. Tasks to be accomplished during a meeting. Yes, the agenda, that's what that's there for. It makes sure that everybody knows what's going to happen, what are we working on, what is going to be discussed. It needs to be sent out before the meeting, and I would argue do not do this 1 hour before the meeting. Do it at least 2 days in advance, 1 to 2 days in advance. You need to do that. You can't just expect people to walk into a meeting and find the agenda in front of them. I think that's an incredibly rude thing to do because it doesn't give the team members any chance to prepare ahead of time. So it needs to be sent out, I would say 1 to 2, I would even say 5 days ahead of the meeting if you can swing it. Not more than 7 though, not more than 7. But somewhere in that window of 2 to 7 would be ideal. It needs to make sure you indicate the amount of time you think you're going to be spending on it. Sometimes you go over, sometimes you go under, but you should have a good guesstimate. And then continuum of care. This is an example, and it is on, I know it's in your book. Where is it? I'm not seeing it. Oh, here it is. Bottom of page 63. So you can take a look at it. Real life example, continuum of care team. Bottom of page 63. Just take a look at that. So, and it gives you the examples that they've got there. All right, this is the end of chapter 4. Sorry, I droned on a little bit. But hopefully it was good information that will help you in the future. So we'll be back to talk again for week 2. But in the meantime, have a fabulous week 1, and I look forward to seeing your discussions and assignments.